Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching Security Scan and I'm Vishal Dahiya. This week we're going to talk about India and the Persian Gulf region. In fact, in the first such endeavor in the strategically located Persian Gulf region, India is taking part in a major multi-nation air combat exercise in United Arab Emirates with fighter jets and heavy-duty airlift aircraft this month. Now, the Indian Air Force has sent 6 Sukhoi 30 MKI fighters and 2 C-17 Globemaster III aircraft and around 125 personnel for the high-voltage desert flag exercise, which will also see participation from the air forces of United States of America, France, South Korea, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. So today we're going to try and understand the strategic importance of this region, how India has managed to go ahead and scale up its relations with all these nations out there, and what exactly is the future roadmap and how strategically important is this region for us. And for more on this, we're joined by two distinguished guests with us. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Dhruv Katoch, Director of India Foundation, is joining us. We also have with us Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. He's a former ambassador who has been to several of these countries on official assignments and understands the situation out there much better. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, to Rajya Sabha Television. And let me begin with you, Ambassador Dayal. Let's first start by understanding the strategic significance and the strategic importance of this region vis-a-vis India.
Well, thank you for your very kind introduction. Let me mention that the Persian Gulf countries are really Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, and Bahrain. Now, India has had a history of close relationships with this region. Firstly, of course, it is in the immediate proximity of India, and there has been trading between the Persian Gulf and India since time immemorial. In more recent times, this region has assumed even greater significance for us. Firstly, because there are around 9 million Indians who live and work in the Persian Gulf region, remitting close to 49 or 50 billion dollars to India. Secondly, the Persian Gulf region is a very important trading partner of India, and the trade between India and the Persian Gulf countries is around $125 billion. Two of the Persian Gulf countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia, are ranked at third and fourth positions amongst India's list of trading partners. So naturally, the region has a lot of commercial importance also for us. But what is even more significant is that now the Gulf cooperation countries have begun to look at India as a strategic partner. Now, mind you, the region is not at peace within itself. Iran, for instance, has serious problems with Saudi Arabia and UAE. And there are also problems which some of the GCC members have with Qatar. However, India has counseled all the countries of the Persian Gulf to resolve their disputes in a peaceful manner and without letting things go out of hand. Though, of course, this is easier said than done. Now, as you mentioned, it is now for the first time that the Indian Air Force is participating in the exercise Desert Flag, which is organized in the UAE, and that a number of significant countries are also going to be participating, such as the US, France, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Bahrain. In all, the participation is said to be from around 10 countries. Now, India's defense ties with some of the Persian Gulf countries have been upscaled quite a lot in recent months. You would recall that in December 2020, our Army Chief, General Narwane, had visited UAE and Saudi Arabia. Now, it was the first ever visit by an Indian army chief to the Gulf nations. And this fact itself underlines that there is a new chapter which is opening up in India's strategic relations with the Gulf countries, though we should not allow this to adversely impact our relationship with Iran. Now, you know, the Indian relationship with Iran has been clouded by the US factor. President
Okay.
Trump had taken a very hard line towards Iran. But now it is expected that things might resolve, and already I understand there are feelers which are being received from the Iranian side for lifting oil from Iran. So we should be vigilant about the changing scenario. At the same time, we should be very, very cognizant of the fact that this region, the Persian Gulf region, is very vital for our strategic interests.
Okay, okay, indeed, it is vital, and a fine balancing act is required, as Ambassador Prabhu Dayal is referring to there. We'll talk more about this fine balancing act and how this has been achieved by us. Let me bring in General Dhruv Katoch here as well. General Katoch, from your point of view, why is this region so strategically important for us?
Vishal, I think that amongst all the challenges which India faces today, though we are not directly involved in what is happening in the Gulf, it is this region which is going to impact us the most should anything go wrong in this particular region. Now, just as a theoretical case, we saw what happened with the with Aramco. When 50% of the oil supply was stopped in that surprise attack. Now, let us take this a step forward and say that a conflict develops there between Iran and, say, Saudi Arabia, or between any two belligerent countries. Unfortunately, the biggest impact is going to be on India because our oil supplies, a major part of our energy supplies, come from there. So, in my view, this is one scenario which is a black swan event, yes, but it will hit us very, very hard. And if it is in India's interest to see that while conflicts may continue to take place in many parts of the globe, the Persian Gulf region must remain secure. This is absolutely vital to India. Now, there are two aspects to this. One, we are talking about this century being the Asian century. But I have made the statement earlier, in case of a conflict in the Gulf, I think that Asian century will be nothing but a dream. The two countries which are going to be very badly affected is both India and China. But you look at the other powers, America is not affected, the Russians are not affected. So the second point which I think we need to mention is the expatriate population. Now, we've got a very big expatriate population in this region, and any adverse fallout of a conflict, the consequences will have to be borne by us. Please see what happened in Yemen and the Herculean effort which was involved of getting our people back. And that was comparatively a very small number. Now, what happens when this number is multiplied 100-fold? What happens to all those families which are dependent on these people working abroad? What happens to our foreign exchange reserves? So a combination of these two factors makes this our vital security and strategic concern. That is one of the reasons I think our foreign policy and our political policy, the political stress has been on this world. And I think we have negotiated it brilliantly. We have maintained excellent relations with Iran. We have maintained excellent relationship with the Arab world. And to that extent, I think our policy has been very successful. All that we need to do is to ensure no hostilities take place in this region and the shipping lines remain open. If we can do that, I think we have maintained our strategic interests and our strategic concerns. Vishal.
Okay, indeed. So there it is, underlies the importance of this particular region. Since both of you have spoken about how people-to-people contact are really the base of the relationship between India and several of these countries out there. Ambassador Dayal, if I could bring you in here, sir, and a bit more clarity on, the kind of effort which has been put in to maintain and then further, nurture the relations between India and several of these countries. If you could take us through some of the key factors there.
Well, people-to-people relationships between India and the members of the Persian Gulf, the countries of the Persian Gulf, have always been very good. In recent years, there has been a very significant effort to promote high level exchanges. Now, my view has consistently been that nothing enhances the relationship between two countries as the exchange of high level visits. Now, our Prime Minister, for instance, has visited a number of countries of the Persian Gulf, and there have also been return visits from Persian Gulf countries to India. Now, this factor has contributed significantly towards closer understanding. And when the governments have a close understanding, that does impact the people to people relationships. Now, as an example, let me tell you that the countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council have become more relaxed and more tolerant towards religious minorities. It was unthinkable some years ago that a Hindu temple could be started in Abu Dhabi, but now the construction of a Hindu temple has commenced, and that reflects the changed attitude of that country towards religious issues. Now, this closer understanding has been facilitated by high level exchanges and the visits which have been paid by our leaders to countries in the Persian Gulf region. Let me also mention that there is a very, very flourishing Indian community in many of the Gulf countries, and this community also helps to promote a closer understanding between their country of domicile and their country of origin, which is India. Uh, all in all, the climate is very much there for bolstering our overall relationship, including in the security area. But of course, the region is prone to conflicts, as General Katoch also mentioned. Some of the significant conflicts which exist are, of course, the one in Yemen, the one in Syria, and the one in Libya, which is not too far away from the Gulf region and is part of the overall West Asian region. Now, these conflicts do tend to impact the relationships which the Persian Gulf countries have with one another. And it is very difficult to foretell how things are unfolding. But for one thing, at the moment, the conflicts are changing the relationships which some of the Gulf countries have with other countries. For instance, UAE and Bahrain have established diplomatic relations with Israel, which was unthinkable some years ago. And this has no doubt been promoted by the conflict between Iran on the one hand and the countries on the southern flank of the Persian Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. Mm-hmm. So India can at best try and counsel both sides to water down their hostility towards each other and to take a more realistic approach based on dialogue. But that's about all we can do because the conflicts are very deep rooted. For one thing, there is a Shia Sunni divide. Secondly, there is a territorial issue. There are many territorial disputes which exist between Iran on one hand and some of the other Gulf countries on the other. So things are really beyond us, but we can be a good friend to both sides and counsel that they settle their disputes amicably. Otherwise, this region can burst into trouble all over again.
Okay, and that's a very, very important aspect out there. That brings me to the next aspect of this relation, and that is the stronger defense ties which India has assiduously built over a period of time through intelligence sharing, through military training, and other such efforts. Major General Katoch, from your point of view, sir, if you could take a relook at all these efforts and then how they have borne fruit in the recent past. What are we trying to achieve here in terms of the deeper defense ties with most of these countries?
The Prime Minister had given out his vision for Sagar, security and growth for all in the region, sometime in 2015. And I think consistently now we have been following that policy in various stages. Now, one of the fundamental principles of the Sagar policy was free and open navigation of the high seas. And the Prime Minister in that vision had also enunciated that India will be prepared to be a net security provider. So since that time, we have seen a number of exercises which we have carried out with the ASEAN countries. We have also been carrying out, of course, this had been done even much earlier with the United States, Australia, and Japan. And now we are seeing a renewed push in carrying out these security exercises with the Persian Gulf countries. And I think by the carrying out an air exercise now, in which we are going to send our Sukhoi fighters and the C-130 transport aircraft, it's a huge leap forward. So, to that extent, I think the region is also seeing India as a net security provider, one. And number two, I think, as the ambassador had earlier stated, they are seeing India as an honest broker. We are in a position to be friends with all warring parties in the region. And I think the region also has that level of trust in us. So to that extent, it serves our strategic purpose to ensure that peace and stability is maintained in the Persian Gulf. Because, Vishal, as I mentioned to you earlier, if we lose stability in the Persian Gulf, the economic interests of India are going to be hit very hard. It is something which we cannot allow or afford. So this is something which we must continuously work forward to ensure that the warring parties within the Gulf do not go to an extent by which it will lead to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and destruction of the oil fields there. That would be disastrous for us. And hopefully, it is something which we will be able to prevent.
Okay,
Vishal.
okay. Indeed, out there. And when, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal was talking about the high-level visits, in fact, the Indian Army Chief has also made first ever such visit to both UAE and Saudi Arabia in December last year as well. This also clearly underlines what Ambassador Dayal was pointing out earlier about how this is, added on to that trust level between both sides here when we're talking about all these countries and India on the other hand. Ambassador Dayal, I'd like to bring you in back here, keeping in mind all these aspects, how strategically significant and how strategically located this entire area is. And it is important for us also, from our point of view, to maintain those relations. How do you see things moving here from here onwards in the future, given the recent developments, some of them you mentioned about how, some of these countries are trying to now normalize relations with Israel?
Well, the Persian Gulf region is important not just for India. It is important for the entire world. And one reason for this is that this region, the Persian Gulf region, has about 50 to 55% of the oil reserves of the global setup. So you can imagine how important it is considered by major global players who require oil supplies from the Persian Gulf region. Now, these supplies, as General was mentioning, have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And this is a conflict area because there is an issue of sovereignty over these waters, whether they are free for navigation or whether the littoral states exercise sovereignty and control. And there have been periodic disputes. Now, it is in the interest of all countries, including India, that there should be free passage of goods through the Strait of Hormuz, including, of course, petroleum supplies. But this factor has been a bit of a problem in recent years, for quite some time. Now, the task before the international community is to sort out this matter, because if this is done, then a lot of other things will also be put to rest. Now, India has a great stake in this region, and this stake in this region also has a stake in India. India is a major global player. India is a very big market. India requires a lot of stuff from these countries, particularly their oil supplies and gas supplies. But at the same time, India is considered a source of stability. On the other hand, Pakistan is now being increasingly regarded as a factor of instability. Now, let me recall the fact that Pakistan had very close strategic ties with many of the Persian Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. In fact, Pakistanis were very integral to the Saudi defense setup. But that seems to be changing because of the fact that Pakistan is being increasingly regarded as a factor of stability. Pakistanis, wherever they go, they bring in terrorism and a lot of undesirable activities. Pakistanis have been involved in drug smuggling to a number of GCC countries. So, in other words, the distancing of the GCC countries from Pakistan is taking place on the one hand, and their growing proximity to India is also happening. Now, mind you, when it comes to the OIC, there is a resolution against India which is passed in regard to J&K. I think we have to sensitize the countries which are part of the GCC that if they want to have realistic relations with India, then they must be sensitive to our concerns, and they cannot be critical of Indian policies just at their whim and fancy. So, in other words, if there is a give and take, India is prepared to have very close relations with the GCC countries. India is prepared to play the role of an honest broker and try to sort out differences which exist on the one hand between Iran and on the other hand Saudi Arabia and UAE. But at the same time, these concerned countries must be sensitive to our needs and requirements also.
Okay. Let's take a quick concluding comment from Major General Katoch here as well on this entire matrix of India's relation with these Persian Gulf countries from this angle, which Ambassador Dayal pointed out, from the Pakistan angle.
You see, Pakistan has always played a spoil sport, and even now they're attempting. Their entire efforts are on now to trying to disrupt the relationship that India has built with the Arab countries and with Iran in the Persian Gulf region. But increasingly, Pakistan's efforts have been rendered null and void. And I think, in my own humble opinion, I think Pakistan is increasingly becoming a non-player, a non-actor. So I personally won't give them too much credence as far as the Persian Gulf is concerned as of now. I think what India should do now is to somehow, both politically and diplomatically, try to see a rapprochement in relationship between two critical countries, that is Iran and the United States. If that rapprochement takes place, we can rest assured that peace and stability will come to the Gulf region. In a wider sense, both Iran and the United States should have been strategic allies. Their interests converge. In fact, they were allies, of course, during the time of the Shah. But the problem came in really with Iran's efforts to become a nuclear power. And that is where the divergence lies.
Okay.
Can India do something in that? This is what we have to see. Vishal.
Okay. So there it is, all about India and the Persian Gulf region. Thank you so much, Major General Dhruv Katoch, as well as Mr. Prabhu Dayal, for sharing your important inputs here on the entire metrics of relations and how strategically important this entire region is and how critical it is to have that fine balancing approach which India has been maintaining so far and trying to scale up the relations individually with all these countries and as a whole with the entire region. We'll come back again next week with a different topic. Till then, you keep watching Rajya Sabha Television. Thank you.